The grand hall of the Valkyrie Empire was filled with towering warriors, their golden armor gleaming under the massive chandeliers. The air was thick with tension. Today was an important day, the day Princess Soria, daughter of the mighty King Zalthor, would choose her mate. The Valkyrie were known across the galaxy as powerful warriors, feared and respected by all. Their empire stretched across dozens of star systems, and their traditions were as strong as their warriors. For centuries, their royal bloodline had been kept pure, with only the strongest and most skilled Valkyrie males given the honor of mating with the royal daughters. Soria stood tall on the raised platform, her deep blue eyes scanning the line of warriors before her. She was not just a princess, she was a warrior herself. She had trained in battle since childhood, and she valued strength above all. Her father, King Zalthor, watched her carefully from his throne, his expression unreadable. The warriors before her were the best of the best, muscular, fierce, and battle-hardened. Each of them had proven their strength in combat, and any one of them would make a worthy mate. But Soria was not looking at them. Her gaze drifted past the Valkyrie warriors to a smaller figure standing at the far end of the hall. He was different, shorter, leaner, dressed in simple combat gear instead of grand armor. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, and his sharp green eyes held a quiet confidence. He was human. Sergeant Ethan Cole stood with his arms crossed, watching the ceremony with a neutral expression. He had been part of a military exchange program, sent by Earth to serve under the Valkyrie forces in an alliance agreement. He had fought alongside them in skirmishes, proving himself as a capable soldier. But he never expected to be here, in the royal hall, during the princess's mating ceremony. Soria stepped forward. The hall fell into complete silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting for her to announce her choice. She raised her hand and pointed directly at Ethan. Gasps filled the room. The warriors stiffened, their hands clenching into fists. King Zalthor's eyes narrowed in disbelief. Ethan blinked, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Wait, what?" he muttered under his breath. Soria's voice was strong and unwavering. "I choose him." The silence was quickly replaced by chaos. The Valkyrie warriors erupted into shouts of outrage. "This is an insult," one of them roared. "A human. He is weak. Unworthy." Another bellowed. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had no idea how he ended up in this situation, but he could tell it was about to get worse. King Zalthor stood from his throne, his massive form towering over everyone in the room. His deep voice rumbled like thunder. "Soria, this is madness. You are royalty. You must choose a warrior of your own kind." Soria turned to face her father, her chin held high. "Strength is not only in muscle. He has fought beside us. He has survived battles where many of our own have fallen. He is not weak." Ethan sighed again. "Look, Princess, I appreciate the compliment, but—" She cut him off, her eyes burning with determination. "You will not refuse." Ethan stared at her, then let out a small chuckle. "I don't think I have much of a choice, do I?" King Zalthor's gaze darkened. "Very well," he said, his voice cold. "If the human wishes to stand beside you, he must prove his worth. He will face the trial of worth." The hall fell silent again. The trial of worth was a legendary test, designed to weed out the weak. No outsider had ever survived it. Ethan exhaled through his nose. "Of course. There's always a trial." Soria did not look away from him. "You can survive this," she said simply. Ethan smirked. "I guess we'll find out." The warriors sneered. They had no doubt the human would fail. But as Ethan stood there, surrounded by towering figures who wanted nothing more than to see him fall, he did not flinch. Because if there was one thing humans were known for, it was proving people wrong. The training grounds of the Valkyrie Palace were filled with an eager crowd. Warriors, nobles, and commoners alike had gathered to witness the trial of worth, a brutal test designed to eliminate the weak. No outsider had ever taken this trial, and no one expected a human to survive it. Ethan Cole stood in the center of the arena, rolling his shoulders and stretching his arms. He had been in tough situations before, but this was something else. The Valkyrie were a race of towering, muscular warriors, built for battle. He was just a human soldier, lean and quick, but nowhere near as strong as them. Soria stood on the royal balcony, watching him closely. She had chosen him, and now he had to prove himself in front of the entire empire. Her father, King Zalthor, sat beside her, his expression hard and unreadable. He had no faith in the human. A Valkyrie elder stepped forward, his voice booming across the arena. The trial of worth consists of 3 challenges. If the human survives them all, he will be recognized as a warrior of the empire. If he fails, the elder smirked, his weakness will be clear to all. Ethan sighed. No pressure, huh? The first challenge was announced. The duel of strength. A massive Valkyrie warrior, almost 8 feet tall, stepped forward. His muscles rippled as he lifted a giant warhammer, easily twice Ethan's size. The crowd roared in approval. This was a test Ethan was sure to lose. The elder raised his hand. Begin. The Valkyrie warrior swung his warhammer with incredible force. Ethan barely dodged, rolling to the side as the hammer smashed into the ground, cracking the stone. He didn't have the strength to overpower his opponent, but he had speed. He weaved between the warrior's attacks, dodging every massive swing. The crowd started murmuring. No Valkyrie would fight this way. They met power with power. But humans? They fought smart. Ethan spotted an opening. As the warrior raised his hammer for another strike, Ethan lunged forward, delivering a powerful kick to the back of his knee. The Valkyrie stumbled. Ethan followed up with a sharp elbow to the side of the warrior's head, using his momentum to throw the larger opponent off balance. With a loud crash, the warrior hit the ground. Ethan quickly placed his foot on the warrior's chest, raising a fist. The crowd gasped. The elder hesitated, then declared, "The human wins the first challenge." The audience was stunned. A few Valkyrie warriors growled in frustration, but some others nodded in approval. King Zalthor's expression did not change, but he watched Ethan closely now. The second challenge was announced. The trial of strategy. Ethan was led to a war simulation, a holographic battlefield where he had to command a small unit against a much larger enemy force. The Valkyrie prided themselves on their battle tactics, and this was where they expected Ethan to fail. His opponents were given overwhelming numbers, while Ethan was given only a few soldiers. The test began. Ethan studied the battlefield quickly, analyzing enemy movements. Instead of facing them head-on, he ordered his forces to retreat into the narrow canyons, where numbers didn't matter as much. He set traps, baited enemies into ambushes, and used hit-and-run tactics. Within minutes, his small force had outmaneuvered and eliminated the much larger enemy army. When the simulation ended, the elder's voice was hesitant but clear. The human wins the second challenge. The crowd was now whispering among themselves. Maybe this human wasn't so weak after all. Soria smirked, crossing her arms. "I told you," she said quietly, glancing at her father. King Zalthor said nothing. The final challenge was announced. The trial of endurance. Ethan was taken to a separate arena where he would have to survive in an extreme environment for 1 hour. The ground beneath him was scorching hot. The air was filled with toxic gas, and the gravity was twice that of Earth. A Valkyrie warrior could endure this for a few hours at most. But a human? The crowd was certain Ethan would collapse in minutes. Ethan gritted his teeth as the heat burned his skin, and the heavy gravity made every movement slow and painful. His breathing became labored, but he forced himself to stay on his feet. 1 minute passed. 5 minutes. His muscles ached. Sweat dripped down his face. His lungs burned from the gas. But he didn't stop. He wouldn't stop. The crowd watched in shock as Ethan kept moving, step by step. He refused to fall. He had survived brutal conditions before: deserts, war zones, battlefields with no supplies. He had learned that pain didn't matter. Only survival did. 30 minutes passed. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. 50 minutes. Soria leaned forward, gripping the railing. He's going to make it. At the 60-minute mark, the elder raised his hand. The human has endured the trial. He passes. The arena fell silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, cheers erupted. Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, but he was still alive. Soria smiled. Even some of the warriors nodded in respect. King Zalthor rose from his throne. His deep voice filled the arena. "You have proven yourself, human." Ethan looked up, still catching his breath. "Does this mean I get a medal?" The king's expression remained unreadable. "It means you are no longer just a visitor in my empire. You are a warrior." Ethan smirked, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Not bad for a human, huh?" Soria walked up to him, offering her hand. He took it, pulling himself to his feet. "You are worthy," she said simply. The crowd cheered again. But in the shadows of the palace, unseen enemies watched. They had expected the human to fail. Now he was a problem. A problem they would have to eliminate. The night sky above the Valkyrie palace was filled with distant stars, shining over the grand city below. The celebrations in the warrior halls had not yet ended. Valkyrie warriors raised their cups, toasting to the unexpected victory of a human in the trial of worth. Some still grumbled that Ethan Cole did not belong among them, but others, including a few high-ranking generals, had started to acknowledge his strength. Ethan sat on the balcony of the palace, away from the noise, looking out at the alien world before him. His muscles ached from the trial, his body exhausted, but his mind remained sharp. Something didn't feel right. He had spent years as a soldier, and his instincts were rarely wrong. Behind him, he heard footsteps. He turned to see Princess Soria walking toward him. She was dressed in a simple combat tunic, her usual armor removed. Even without it, she carried herself with the confidence of a warrior. "You should be celebrating," she said, crossing her arms. "You did something no human has done before." Ethan smirked. "I'll celebrate when I can move without feeling like I've been hit by a tank." Soria sat down beside him, her gaze serious. "You surprised them today. Even my father." Ethan leaned back against the stone railing. "Did I surprise you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I expected you to fight well. But I did not think you would win all 3 trials." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, well, humans don't like losing. It's kind of our thing." Soria studied him for a moment. "There is something different about your kind. Valkyrie warriors fight with honor, with strength. But you fight with something else." Ethan chuckled. "We fight because we have to. Because the universe isn't kind, and nobody is coming to save us." She tilted her head. "That is why I chose you." Ethan looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Because I don't expect a rescue." "No," she said, "because you make your own fate." They sat in silence for a moment, but Ethan's mind was still unsettled. The feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. Then he noticed it, a shadow moving in the distance. His body tensed. "Did you see that?" Soria followed his gaze. "See what?" Ethan was already standing. "Stay here." He moved quickly, making his way down the balcony stairs, following the movement he had seen. His instinct screamed that something was wrong. As he turned a corner into a dark corridor, he heard something, a faint click of metal. A weapon being armed. Ethan threw himself to the ground just as a blast shot flew past his head, hitting the wall behind him. He rolled to the side, drawing his sidearm and firing back. The enemy moved fast, ducking behind cover. Ethan caught a glimpse of them, not a Valkyrie. Their armor was sleek, dark, with a strange emblem on their shoulder. He had seen that emblem before. The Zythar Dominion. Ethan cursed under his breath. The Zythar were enemies of the Valkyrie, a race known for their ruthless tactics and deadly assassins. If they were here, it meant only one thing. This was an assassination attempt. He fired again, forcing the enemy to retreat down the corridor. Ethan ran after them. But just as he turned a corner, a heavy boot slammed into his chest, knocking him to the ground. Before he could react, the assassin aimed a dagger at his throat. "You should not have survived the trial, human," the assassin hissed, their voice cold and mechanical. "Now you die." Ethan gritted his teeth, grabbing the assassin's wrist before the blade could plunge into his neck. He twisted hard, forcing the enemy's arm away. With his free hand, he punched them in the side of the head, using all the strength he had left. The assassin staggered back, and Ethan used the moment to kick their legs out from under them. They hit the ground hard. Before Ethan could finish them off, the assassin activated a small device on their wrist. A bright flash of light exploded in front of Ethan's eyes, blinding him. By the time he could see again, the assassin was gone. Ethan cursed, pulling himself up. He turned just as Soria and a squad of Valkyrie guards arrived. "What happened?" Soria demanded. Ethan shook his head. "Assassin. Sci-Fi. They wanted me dead." The guards immediately tensed, gripping their weapons. Soria's expression darkened. The Sci-Fi would not risk sending an assassin unless they had a plan. Ethan nodded. "Exactly. This wasn't just about me. They're planning something bigger." Soria's eyes burned with anger. "Then we need to stop them." Ethan smirked, despite the situation. "Now you're speaking my language." As alarms rang through the palace, one thing became clear. This was just the beginning. The Sci-Fi had made their move, and war was coming. Ethan had won the trial of worth. But now he would have to fight a much bigger battle. The palace was on high alert. Valkyrie warriors patrolled the halls, their weapons ready, their golden armor reflecting the dim lights of the corridors. The attack on Ethan had shaken the royal guards. A Sci-Fi assassin inside the palace meant that the enemy had found a way in. Ethan stood in the royal war room, rubbing his bruised chest, where the assassin had kicked him. He had faced death before, but this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a warning. The Sci-Fi Dominion didn't send assassins for no reason. They were preparing for something big. Soria paced near the large holographic map that showed the surrounding star systems. Her sharp blue eyes studied the different planets, looking for any sign of where the enemy might strike next. King Salthor entered the room, his presence commanding. His golden cape flowed behind him as he stepped forward. The Valkyrie warriors in the room immediately straightened. "The Sci-Fi dared to send an assassin into my palace," the king growled, his deep voice shaking the walls. "This is an act of war." Ethan exhaled. "They didn't come just for me." He stepped forward, pointing at the holographic map. "They wanted to send a message. If they're bold enough to attack inside your palace, that means they already have a plan in motion." One of the Valkyrie generals frowned. "But where?" The Sci-Fi's last movements were in the outer sectors. Our scouts reported no major activity. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That's the problem. The Sci-Fi don't fight wars with massive armies like you do. They use deception. They hide until they strike." Soria crossed her arms. "Then we need to find them before they attack." King Salthor considered this. "If the Sci-Fi are planning an invasion, they will need a forward base, somewhere close to our homeworld, but hidden." Ethan's eyes scanned the map. His experience as a soldier told him to think like the enemy. If he were leading a secret invasion, where would he hide his forces? Then he saw it. He pointed at a small moon near the edge of the system. "What's this?" A Valkyrie officer answered. "That is Vornak, an abandoned mining colony. It was shut down years ago after the resources were depleted." Ethan's instincts screamed at him. "That's where they are." The generals hesitated. Why would the Sci-Fi hide in an abandoned colony? Ethan looked at them seriously. "Because it's abandoned. No one would expect an enemy force to set up there. It's close enough for a surprise attack, but far enough that you wouldn't notice movement. It's the perfect hiding spot. Soria nodded. It makes sense. We need to investigate. King Salthor turned to his generals. Prepare a strike team. We will uncover the enemy's plans and crush them before they strike. The mission begins. An hour later, Ethan found himself aboard a Valkyrie dropship, speeding toward Vornak. Soria sat beside him, checking her weapons. Around them, elite Valkyrie warriors prepared for battle, their energy rifles humming softly. Ethan tightened the straps of his combat gear. He had fought in many battles, but this mission felt different. He wasn't just a human soldier anymore. He was part of this fight. Soria glanced at him. You are ready. Ethan smirked. You're asking me now. We're already on the ship. She gave a small smile. You are different from the others. You do not fear battle. Ethan looked at her seriously. I do fear battle. I just don't let it stop me. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Approaching Vornak. Scanners picking up strange energy readings from the surface. Ethan and Soria exchanged looks. This confirmed it. The Zythar were here. The ship entered the moon's thin atmosphere, flying over dark, rocky terrain. Below them, the abandoned colony stretched out like a ghost town, but something was wrong. Ethan's sharp eyes caught movement near one of the old mining facilities. There, he pointed. They're hiding inside. The pilot nodded. Deploying now. The ship hovered just above the ground, and the strike team jumped out. As soon as Ethan's boots hit the rocky surface, he crouched, raising his weapon. The air was silent, too silent. Soria signaled the team forward, and they moved toward the facility's entrance. The metal doors were slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Ethan's instincts flared. It's a trap. Just as he spoke, the ground exploded. The team was thrown back as Zythar soldiers emerged from hidden tunnels, weapons blazing. Ethan rolled behind cover, firing back. I knew who ate it, he shouted. Soria leaped forward, cutting down an enemy with her energy blade. Then fight, human. Ethan grinned, adrenaline rushing through his veins. Oh, I'm fighting. The battle was chaotic. The Zythar were fast and deadly, using advanced cloaking technology to vanish and reappear mid-attack. But Ethan and the Valkyrie warriors fought back with skill and precision. Ethan dodged a plasma shot, countering with a well-placed grenade. The explosion sent several Zythar flying. Soria fought beside him, her movements swift and lethal. They covered each other's backs, moving like a team. Then, through the smoke, Ethan saw something much worse. A massive warship was hidden behind the facility. It was sleek, black, and covered in Zythar markings. An invasion fleet. His heart pounded. Soria, they're not just hiding. They're preparing for a full-scale invasion. Soria's eyes widened. We need to warn my father. Ethan reloaded his weapon. Then we better finish this fight fast. The battle was far from over. And the war had just begun. Blaster fire filled the air as the battle raged outside the abandoned mining facility. The Zythar warriors moved like shadows, using their cloaking technology to appear and disappear in an instant. But the Valkyrie warriors were not easy prey. Their golden armor shone under the dim light of Vornak's sky as they pushed forward, fighting with strength and precision. Ethan moved quickly, his human reflexes giving him an edge. He dodged a plasma bolt, rolled behind cover, and fired back. His shots hit true, dropping two Zythar before they could react. Soria fought beside him, her energy blade slicing through the air. She parried an enemy's strike and countered with a deadly thrust, taking down another assassin. The two warriors covered each other's backs, moving like a well-trained team. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just a hidden outpost. This was a war camp. The Zythar weren't just planning to attack. They were already preparing for an invasion. Then he saw it. Beyond the battlefield, behind the facility, a massive warship loomed. It was sleek, black, and covered in Zythar markings. Ethan's stomach tightened. This was the invasion fleet. Soria followed his gaze, her face darkening. We need to stop them before they launch. Ethan gritted his teeth. Easier said than done. The betrayal. Just then, the Valkyrie captain, a grizzled warrior named Torvik, signaled to Soria, "Princess, we are pushing them back. We must press forward." Soria nodded. "Take your warriors and flank them from the east. Ethan and I will head to the warship." Torvik hesitated. His golden eyes flickered toward Ethan. "With respect, Princess, we do not need the human." Ethan clenched his fists. He had faced prejudice before, but now was not the time for arguments. Soria's voice was cold. "He has earned his place, and he saved my life." Torvik's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. "Very well." He turned to his warriors. "Move out." As the Valkyrie pushed forward, Ethan and Soria sprinted toward the warship. Plasma bolts whizzed past them, and explosions shook the ground. They reached the edge of the battlefield, finding cover behind a broken transport vehicle. Ethan checked his weapon. "We need a way inside that ship." Soria scanned the structure. "There, a maintenance hatch. It will lead us inside." They ran for it, but just as they reached the hatch, something went wrong. A plasma bolt struck Soria's shoulder. She cried out, stumbling forward. Ethan caught her, pulling her behind cover. Blood dripped from the wound, staining her tunic. Ethan's eyes burned with anger. He turned, expecting to see a Zythar sniper, but instead, it was Torvik. He stood a few meters away, his blaster still smoking. His Valkyrie warriors had turned their weapons toward Ethan and Soria. Ethan's mind raced. "What the hell are you doing?" Torvik's expression was cold. "Ending this war before it begins." Soria's eyes were filled with pain, but she forced herself to speak. "You betrayed us." Torvik stepped forward. "This is not betrayal, Princess. This is survival." He glanced at Ethan. "The human changed everything. Your decision to choose him as your mate has weakened our empire. The Zythar saw this as a chance to strike. And now, our only hope is negotiation." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You made a deal with the enemy." Torvik didn't deny it. "Yes, the Zythar have agreed to spare our homeworld if we surrender you both." Ethan clenched his fists. "You think they'll keep their promise?" Torvik's gaze darkened. "It is better than war." Soria struggled to stand. "You are a fool, Torvik. The Zythar do not honor their word." Torvik sighed. "I did what had to be done." He raised his weapon. "Goodbye, Princess." Ethan moved first. With lightning reflexes, he grabbed a smoke grenade from his belt and slammed it to the ground. Thick gray fog exploded around them, blinding everyone. Ethan grabbed Soria's hand. "Move." They sprinted for the maintenance hatch, slipping inside just as blaster fire tore through the smoke. The door slammed shut behind them. Inside the enemy warship, the narrow hallway was dimly lit, filled with the quiet hum of alien machinery. Ethan's heart pounded as he checked Soria's wound. She winced but shook her head. "It is not fatal. I can fight." Ethan exhaled. "We need to disable this ship. If it launches, the Valkyrie homeworld is finished." Soria nodded. "Then we destroy it from the inside." They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding patrols. Ethan's military training kicked in. Every sound, every movement mattered. Finally, they reached the engine room. The core pulsed with blue energy, powering the massive warship. Ethan scanned the controls. "If we overload this, the whole ship will go up." Soria stepped forward. "Then let us end this." She pulled a small device from her belt and placed it against the control panel. A countdown timer appeared. 5 minutes. Suddenly, alarms blared. A Zythar commander appeared at the doorway, flanked by elite guards. "You have made a grave mistake, human." The commander's voice was cold, mechanical. "This warship will launch, and your species will be the first to fall. Ethan raised his weapon. Not today. The enemy charged forward. The final battle had begun. Alarms blared across the warship as Ethan and Soria faced the Scythar commander and his elite guards. The dim red emergency lights cast shadows on the walls, making the alien warriors look even more menacing. Their black armor shimmered under the glow of the ship's power core, and their energy weapons hummed, ready to fire. Ethan's heart pounded, but his hands were steady as he raised his blaster. He had fought in many battles, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for the future of an entire world. The Scythar commander stepped forward, his voice cold and emotionless. "Surrender, human. Your resistance is meaningless." Ethan smirked. "Yeah. Then why do you look so nervous?" The commander's red eyes narrowed. He gestured to his soldiers. "Kill them. A fight for survival." The battle erupted. Ethan dodged left, avoiding a plasma shot, and returned fire. His blaster bolts struck true, taking down one of the elite guards. Soria, despite her injury, moved like a shadow, her energy blade flashing through the air. She blocked a strike, countered with a deadly thrust, and dropped another enemy. The Scythar were fast, faster than most warriors Ethan had fought before. Their movements were almost unnatural, their bodies twisting in ways that seemed impossible. But Ethan had one advantage. He was human. Humans fought differently. They adapted. They improvised. And right now, Ethan was doing just that. He rolled forward, grabbing a fallen enemy's plasma rifle. Spinning on his heel, he fired a rapid burst, catching two more Scythar off guard. They fell, their armor sparking as they hit the ground. Soria leaped over a console, slicing through the last guard. She turned to Ethan, breathing hard but determined. The commander remained. The commander's wrath. The Scythar commander snarled, stepping forward. "You are strong, human, but not strong enough." Before Ethan could react, the commander vanished. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. He ducked just in time as the commander reappeared behind him, swinging a vibrating energy blade. The weapon sliced through the air, missing Ethan's head by inches. Ethan spun, blocking the next strike with his rifle, but the commander was too strong. The force of the blow sent Ethan stumbling backward. Soria rushed in, her own blade clashing against the commander's. Sparks flew as they exchanged blindingly fast strikes. The commander kicked Soria in her injured shoulder. She cried out and fell back. Ethan's vision ***. Ethan's grip tightened around his combat knife as he faced the Scythar commander. The alien's red eyes gleamed with confidence, his dark armor pulsing with energy. Soria was injured, struggling to rise, but Ethan stood firm. He had come too far to fail now. The ship's alarms blared, warning of the self-destruct countdown. The explosives they had planted were ready to go off. But first, Ethan had to survive this fight. The commander lunged, swinging his vibrating energy blade. Ethan barely dodged in time, the weapon slicing through the air where his head had been just moments before. With a quick movement, Ethan dropped low and rolled forward, slashing his knife at the commander's side. The blade cut through the armor, and the alien let out a sharp hiss of pain. But he recovered quickly. With inhuman speed, the commander whirled around, his blade slashing toward Ethan's chest. Ethan barely blocked it with his rifle, but the impact sent him crashing into the wall. His weapon skidded across the floor, out of reach. The commander loomed over him. "You fight well for a human," he sneered, "but you cannot win." Ethan gritted his teeth. Humans don't give up. At the last second, he grabbed a fallen blaster and fired point-blank into the commander's chest. The energy blast ripped through the armor, sending the Scythar stumbling backward. Soria, despite her injury, saw her chance. She sprang forward, her energy blade flashing, and plunged it deep into the commander's back. The Scythar commander let out a final, shocked gasp. His glowing red eyes dimmed. Then he collapsed. The fight was over. The escape. Ethan exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. We need to move. Soria clutched her injured shoulder, but nodded. The ship will explode in less than 3 minutes. They ran through the corridors, dodging fallen debris as the warship shook violently. The self-destruct sequence was already reaching its final stage. Through the chaos, they reached an escape pod bay. The doors hissed open, revealing a small, sleek pod. Ethan helped Soria inside before climbing in himself. He quickly activated the controls, and the pod's doors sealed shut. Hold on, he warned as he slammed the launch button. The pod blasted away from the warship, speeding toward the surface of Vornak. Ethan looked out the window just in time to see the enemy ship erupt in a massive explosion. Fire and debris scattered in all directions, lighting up the dark sky. Soria watched with quiet satisfaction. It is done. Ethan smirked. Told you we'd make it. She gave him a tired but genuine smile. You are impossible, human. Ethan chuckled. And you're just figuring that out now. A new future. The escape pod landed near the battlefield, where the remaining Valkyrie forces were regrouping. The moment the hatch opened, Ethan helped Soria out, and the warriors rushed toward them. One soldier gasped, "The princess, she is alive." Another looked at Ethan with awe. And the human, he fought beside her. Then, King Zalthor himself arrived, his golden armor stained with battle marks. His piercing eyes studied them both. Ethan stood tall, expecting anger or distrust. But instead, the king's face softened. You have done what many thought impossible, he said. You stopped the Sci-Fi invasion. Ethan shrugged. Wasn't easy. Soria stepped forward, her gaze locked onto her father's. Ethan fought with honor. He risked everything to save not only me but our entire world. The king was silent for a moment. Then he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You have earned the respect of the Valkyrie people, human. Ethan smirked. Does that mean you won't kill me for it, your daughter choosing me? A chuckle rumbled from the king's chest. It means I will consider it. The warriors around them laughed, and for the first time, the tension truly lifted. Soria turned to Ethan, her blue eyes shining. So, human, will you stay? Ethan thought about it. About the battles he had fought, the war he had stopped, and the princess beside him who had fought just as fiercely. He smirked. You really have to ask. Soria smiled. Then let's go home. And as the Valkyrie warriors cheered, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and it had done so the only way it knew how, by never giving up.